Eric,
Yeah,
thank you so much for being here. Um, so first, I
thank
thought
you.
just tell us where you're at and what you're doing currently in your career, and then we'll go back in time.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's fun to reconnect with old scholars that I haven't seen and talked to in many years and meet some new scholars as well. So right now I am an assistant professor of practice at the University of Arizona. I'm in the Department of Linguistics. Uh, but most of my teaching is actually in an online master's program, our master's in human language technology. So it's a lot of teaching programming to people who are not coming from a computer science background, but who usually have a strong background in language, working with language as data, and who want to move into natural language processing, AI, getting AI systems to treat language better to do more useful things with language.
Super fascinating. I cannot wait to learn more about that job and linguists overall. But I think, not that I've met every Flinn scholar, but you have one of the most interesting pivots. I think a lot of us have pivots. Some of us have our plans
There are
from
a lot of
birth,
pivots among
you
Flynn.
know? But tell us, go back to the beginning, like you had your life planned out, you said, you're in high school, you
Mhm.
knew what you're gonna do. Tell us what plan A was.
So while I was in high school, I think actually going back to when I was 3, my parents tell me I had this all worked out. I had decided I was going to become an astronaut, and that was the plan was arranged to get me there. The plan was go to an, get an undergraduate degree in either planetary geophysics or astrophysics at either Caltech or MIT, then go to the other one for graduate school, get a job at JPL, and eventually go into the astronaut program as a scientist astronaut. Was really hoping to get on the first Mars mission. Apparently, I wouldn't even have made it had I actually, kept up because we're still not going to Mars. Yeah, but
Those
that
are
was the
just small
plan.
details.
As of the time I applied for the Flynn, as of the time I got to U of A, uh, was majoring in physics. Christina was also a physics major my year. We were physics homework buddies, uh, enjoying physics, doing well, and then things changed.
Things changed. So, like, your first kind of cornerstone of things not going exactly how you had planned from age three is you didn't end up going to Caltech or MIT. So, how did you
Mhm.
end up taking the Flynn Scholarship? What was the draw and tell us where you went to school and how you started.
Mhm.
What did you major in at first?
So I forget how I first learned about the Flynn. Uh, no, I think it was somebody in nuclear engineering at ASU had given like a public lecture on the Chernobyl disaster. And somebody in the nuclear, like a student who was in the nuclear engineering program, was at this talk and mentioned that they were a Flynn. I don't even know who it is, who it was now, but that brought into my mind, okay, there's this thing called the Flynn, a great scholarship if you want to stay in Arizona. But as I have my plans. I wasn't planning to stay in Arizona. But in high school, got to that point where I'm applying to schools, and I thought, well, I should apply at least and just see. Maybe I can use it as a bargaining chip to get more money out of MIT and Caltech. Um, but when I actually applied for the Flynn, got the Flynn, then that sort of changed the calculus, and I realized, okay, not just this is not just a bargaining chip. This could be a real opportunity that I wouldn't have if I go to MIT, if I go to Caltech. So that changed the plan, and I'm like, okay, well, I can go to U of A for undergraduate. They have a fantastic program in astronomy, fantastic program in planetary science, and I'll do one of these other schools for graduate study, and then continue on with the plan. We'll just drop right back in.
And what's funny is I know you're a 1993 scholar, right?
Yeah.
So the funny thing is I'm sure it wasn't me, but I actually started off in nuclear engineering and at ASU, and I don't think I was at a Chernobyl lecture, but it could have
Yeah.
been like a version of me, 2 years later or something,
It was
saying the
someone
same thing.
male, but I've completely lost track of who it was. But they were very happy being a Flynn and very effusive. It was a great
Yeah.
program.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, Eric and I found out we have a lot of funny pivots in common, and one was starting off in engineering, wanting to be an astronaut.
Hmm.
Um, so I think both current scholars and alumni would like to hear a little bit about your internships because I think those were pivotal in in your decision making for that affected
Hmm.
the rest of your life. And I think we can learn a lot from being open to these internships and listening to what goes on in our head. So tell us a little bit about the internships you did.
Yeah. Or, well, I'll actually start with what was going on in my head, maybe
Sure.
too. So freshman year, I get to the University of Arizona, enjoying it, but begin to notice a voice in the back of my mind that's sort of saying, you're really focused on this thing. If it turned out that that was not the best thing for you, would you be willing to let go of it? And I realized that I kind of wasn't willing to let go. And maybe for some people, being, single-mindedly focused is a great way to get what they want, where they want to go in life. But for me, I realized I might be missing a better something by holding on to this one thing and not even entertaining other options. But at freshman year, I didn't have anything else that engaged me, that drew me in the way, physics and planetary science did. So the idea is in the back of my mind, but it's not an immediate change. Uh, so uh, for I think a total of 3 years, I was able to be in something called the NASA Space Grant Internship Program. One summer as a high school student between high school and college. And that was at Arizona State University. Then a second summer as an undergraduate at Arizona State University, working with the same research team there, and then an additional summer or additional year at University of Arizona. So really great program, really great experiences. My time at Arizona State was working with a guy who was doing uh, geologic analysis using remote sensing data of Venus. So we're looking at radar imagery, not from a lander, from something in orbit, and inferring geologic history, geologic changes over time based on radar imagery. And that was fun. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. I was able to go to a conference to give a presentation on the work that came out of that. And at this conference, met a Russian geophysicist who was also doing geologic analysis of remote sensing data of Venus. And he said, "Hey, this looks like you're doing really good stuff. If you ever want to do some more work on this topic, you should let me know." So, okay, keep that in mind. But I'm still having fun with this NASA space grant stuff. So I have these Arizona State University internships, have one at U of A, and then because I was in the space grant program, I was able to apply for something called the NASA Academy, which actually Michelle Manitti, who's also here, was I think the year ahead of me at NASA Academy at the Goddard Space Flight Center. It's the NASA facility that's just outside of Washington, D.C. Really, really great experience. A lot of the people who are in that program have the same goal. They want to become astronauts, and this is a full way to see what it would be like to be an astronaut, what it would be like to work for NASA, especially as a scientist or an engineer. And so, as part of this program, being at NASA Goddard for the summer, if there was a shuttle launch during the summer, they would try to take everyone down to Florida to watch the launch. It's really exciting. It's part of this seeing what it would be like to be involved working at NASA. And so there's a shuttle launch this summer. I'm there. We're scheduled. We all make our way down to Florida. We're there for the weekend of the launch. We're in the VIP viewing area, and it has been raining cats and dogs all weekend. Clearly, the launch is not going to happen at the scheduled time, but we're all still there. We're sitting in the viewing area in, raincoats and umbrellas and things. And we're looking at the shuttle 3 miles away, The crew is there, they're fueling it, they're going to a certain point in the launch countdown when they will say, okay, now we're going to scrub and wait for a different day. I realized I was so anxious. I mean, clearly not going to launch, but I'm looking at this vehicle, which is sitting on a huge amount of highly explosive material that's going to get it into orbit eventually, but not today. Even so, I am like, if something goes wrong, I'm going to watch 7 people die, and that's not going to be a very pleasant experience for me. And I realized that if I was there on the shuttle and I didn't have a wife and kids, but assuming I had a wife and kids, if they were sitting in the VIP area where I was sitting at the time, they would be feeling that not because of, someone they don't know, but because of me, part of their family. So, even more anxiety. And that would maybe be a lot of stress, maybe not something I really wanted to walk into. And that experience, I mean, was enough to sort of dislodge the first boulder. Like, okay, maybe I can let go of the astronaut thing. I still enjoy science and mathematics and planetary science, physics, all this, but maybe I don't have to be an astronaut. I can still work for NASA. I can go on and do these things. Okay, and again, Michelle, if you're listening, NASA Academy, wonderful experience, highly recommended to everybody. It had this positive effect of allowing me to make this decision.
Also, like to me, I know some mentor of mine once told me that the best thing to one of the helpful tools to making a decision is realize what is pushing you and what is pulling you. And so
Hmm.
you just listed two pushes in a way, your niggly voice, whether
Hmm.
it's, your intuition or God, and then you have this push of anxiety, like, don't really want that. But then you've got a couple pulls. One of them involves a girl, and one of them
Yes.
involves the trip. So tell us how like these polls evolved because these next two things like being in Russia and you met a girl kind
Hmm.
of were to me the spark that really pushed you on your path.
It does all come together in Moscow. So we go back to this Russian geophysicist who said, "Hey, if you ever want to come work with me in Moscow, let me know." And I'm a Flynn, so I have these summer travel opportunities that I can fund, that I could, I design what I want to do, and I thought, okay, that sounds like a really great match. Why don't I try and design a summer internship where I go to Moscow? So I do that the following summer, and I find that it's not as enjoyable as I was expecting it to be. I had enjoyed doing this kind of work before, but when I got to Moscow and I was doing the same work in this research lab, it was extremely frustrating to me to encounter now a high degree of, well, this researcher, based on his experience, thinks it should be this way, and this other person, based on his experience, thinks it should be this way. And I felt like it shouldn't just come down to someone thinks it's this and someone else thinks it's that. We should have a better way of being able to resolve this. And that frustration was there. There was probably also cross-cultural stress because I'm in Moscow. I had had a year of Russian, I think my freshman year. So I wasn't totally unable to function, but it was still a new environment and that adds some stress. But because I had had a year of Russian, while I'm there, I'm sort of refreshing my Russian ability, and I found the case system of Russian to be so engaging. And these things that I enjoyed about math and science and being able to look systematically at a problem or a set of data and try and come up with a model that would tell us how that data worked, why we saw the patterns that we saw, I realized that could also be applied to language. And that was enough to sort of dislodge another boulder. Like, okay, maybe I can get into this analyzing language kind of stuff. And you mentioned a girl, so Another piece that fits into this, uh, the academic year between the time where I'm in this NASA internship and then I'm in Moscow, uh, in a group of friends, one of those people who I didn't hadn't really met yet, she was in a linguistics class. I think she had just decided to change her major to linguistics. In this class, for honors credit, she had to write like one paper. It all came down to one paper. And someone said, "Oh, you should have Eric read your paper for you and have him give comments or something." People do this, and they kind of give a cursory read, like, "Oh yeah, it sounds great. Here's a spelling error. Fix this, whatever." But I really got into reading this paper, this linguistics paper, and was like, "Oh wow, this is kind of cool. It's like we're analyzing regularities in noun formation, and it's an interesting paper." I really like went into, here's your logic flow, and you're aiming for this point, but you can make it clearer by doing this. So this was my introduction to really what linguistics could be, just reading this other person's paper. Um, Apparently, it also left a pretty strong impression on this girl as well, because then we began talking and eventually began dating. And while I was in Moscow for that summer, she was in Romania teaching English. So we were still communicating, talking about linguistics. And the fall after I get back from Moscow, I'm like, okay, I think I'm able to make the jump. I had already almost finished the degree in physics, so there was no sense in dumping that. I just added a second major in linguistics. And so I planned it out. I was able to finish in an additional year, so 5 years as an undergraduate. But the cute girl was a year behind me. She was going to finish a year later anyway, so now we end up finishing at the same time. Everything's lovely.
Which moral of the story is, let's just say the cute girl ends up sticking around and is still
And the
present in
cute
Eric's
girl is
life.
now, yeah, my wife. But
So, moral of the story is say yes to helping other people. You never know
yes,
what can come out of it.
no
I
guarantees, but
Yeah, but hey, I love it. So just because like one of the things that fascinates me is like, what does a linguist do? And so let's just take a little side because I think a lot of people are interested in because I mean, you alone have covered
mm,
different areas in linguistics, but can you give us a
mm.
broad map of the field? Like how would any of us who know nothing about the field look at it?
Okay. So what ties everything in the field together? And actually, I have a freshman linguistics class that I teach here. This is how I present it in that class. Really, what we're trying to do is describe, what does someone know when they know a language? What is the knowledge that you have in your mind that allows you to speak English and to understand English? And so that knowledge, we can kind of divide it into two major areas and then a lot of other minor areas that touch those. So on the one hand, there's how do we actually produce sounds with part of our anatomy that travel through the air and get into your ears, your auditory system, get processed by your nervous system and end up as, you hear something. What's that process? How does that work? And then once you go through that process to the stage where you've got words, or at least parts of words that have meaning, now how do we combine those parts, meaningful parts, into complex words, into complex phrases, into whole sentences, discourses that have a logical flow and make sense? How does all of that meaning get made from these basic building blocks? So the two big parts I've been able to enjoy doing a lot of stuff in both the sound side and the syntax and meaning side. Most of, well, no, I won't say most. You can find people who specialize in both of those, and there's all sorts of other specializations, pragmatics, why you chose to say this sentence, but not this other sentence in this context. What does that mean? Why did you make that choice? So
So
huge
it's not just
area.
like a foreign language type, well, how does a language structure? There's a lot going on. So in
Mhm.
if someone who majors in linguistics, do you need to have typically like what does a graduate degree buy you that an undergraduate doesn't? Is it kind of necessary to get to certain spaces? And how did you decide what to do for grad school.
Mhm. So I think the biggest difference between the content of an undergraduate degree in linguistics versus a graduate degree is one of scope. In a graduate program, you're going to be introduced to a wider range of formal systems that are used to model and describe the knowledge someone has about sound, the knowledge someone has about putting words and units together to make meanings. You just don't have enough time as an undergraduate to learn all of those systems in all of their complexity, because there's a lot of mathematical complexity that describes how those systems function. I mean, of course, in graduate study in general, there's also this sort of you're learning how to identify a research question, design a program of research that will answer that question and expand knowledge in general. That you might not get that uh, as clearly or as richly as an undergraduate.
Yeah, I think that there's at least a parallel in economics, and I'm wondering if it's the case in most fields. Like to me, looking back, undergrad, you get this splattering of core tools and then just a whole bunch of stuff that's in the topic, and it's really grad school that allows you to go deeper and figure out what
Mhm.
part of that is actually interesting to you personally.
Yeah,
Um,
identifying I'm interested in this. I want to work on this. That's I feel like a major component of graduate study people get.
so so just to leap to China for a second, and we'll
Oh.
go back in time. For a lot of people, like the idea of, I mean, for me, when I was, in college especially, but even now, my friends feel the same way. If people want to move to a different country and actually work there, the process can be so daunting that they don't even go that way. And
Hmm.
and usually it requires being sponsored on a work permit and, all that kind of, visa stuff, money, um, adapting to a foreign language and country. Tell us a little bit how one ends up in China, and you weren't in just like, Beijing. Yeah.
Right.
So how'd you get there, and how would you, what are some like pro tips that you would say you guys should think about this before you go down that road? I know you had a great experience,
Hmm.
but just help us think about it.
Yeah, it's a nuanced experience, even if it's overall positive. There's a lot of variation to it. So I'll start with how did I get there? So the cute girl and I, we graduate from U of A, get married, and she has actually some relatives who live in Taiwan. We were both thinking about China as a place to do linguistics. Another strand of my history that I hadn't mentioned, when I was 9, my dad was stationed in Beijing for 6 months at a time. My mom and I were able to go visit. So we had some connections to sort of the expat community in China in the early 1980s, as China was really just opening up. So in the back of my mind, I'm sort of hearing about expats who are working in China, doing linguistics especially, and that idea, when all the pieces came together, then it was a very natural, oh, that's a great place where there's a lot of underdocumented languages that need experts to be able to go in and work with communities to say, if a community would like to accomplish this task with their language, what do they need to do to be able to do that? Whether that's developing a writing system, whether that's working on bilingual or multilingual education, it helps to have outside support for communities to be able to do that. So we get married, we spend a year in Taiwan, we're practicing our Chinese, everything seems great. Then the plan is go back to the US for graduate study in linguistics, because the NGO that we're planning on working with generally requires that you have a graduate degree in linguistics to be able to do the kind of things, to be able to contribute to communities, support communities in the way that they would like to do with their language work. So back in the US for a few years, get a PhD in linguistics, and then within days of filing the dissertation, we're on a plane going to China. So if you are going to move to a different country, it's nice to have that kind of a chance where you can sort of get your feet wet first, try it out without committing to, oh yeah, I'll be there for 10 years. Just so that if you realize, for this to be successful, I really need to have every 6 months a chance to come back and reconnect with family. Or maybe it's really important for you to be able to spend Thanksgiving at home. Whatever it is, to learn that in a safe way before you are really committed to I've got a job here, I have to stay here. I really don't have that flexibility. If you know it going into it in advance, that can help you build that flexibility in. We're just Okay, one thing, feet wet. Number two, I think is just being aware of cross-cultural stress. It's a thing that happens to pretty much everyone to some extent. Maybe some people find it less stressful than others, but everyone faces some level of stress as you're learning how to function in a culture that you didn't grow up in. So if there are ways that you can sort of get that taste and experience that kind of adjustment again before you're committed, that will also, I think, help you be successful in the long run. You can learn about yourself, what you need to make sure that you build in to be successful, adjusting to that stress. For us, I think we were fairly fortunate that we didn't have to jump into a really rural community right off the bat. We didn't go to Beijing. We were in a provincial capital in the south. So I kind of draw an analogy to like moving to New Orleans. If your eventual goal is, you're coming from China, let's say, you're going to work in the US and you want to work with the Cajun community in Louisiana, it would be a really big jump to go move out to the bayou or something. But if you can start in New Orleans or Baton Rouge, a fairly major city, and make trips and adjust and learn what that's going to be like, that I think will help you be successful overall. It worked well for us. So we were in a provincial capital in Guangxi for at least the first 2 years or so, and able to make little trips out to villages and see what that would be like before we actually had to go out and live in a village for like 6 months at a time. When I say live in a village, it's a small town by Chinese standards, but still like 60,000 people. That's where we're spending most of our nights, and then from there making trips out to even smaller, even more rural locations.
So I'm just dying of curiosity of so many things when they're living in a rural, smaller Chinese town or village. First, what years are we talking about? Like, what's the time frame?
So, 2005 was when I finished grad school, and we went with this NGO, SIL International, end of 2005. 2005 to 2007, we were primarily in language study, learning well, not learning, improving our Mandarin based in the provincial capital and making these occasional trips out to places. And then 2007 or 2008, spring of 2008 was when we first did our really big field project where we're collecting language data to document how a particular variety of Zhuang is spoken in like a 1 million person, 3 county area right up on the border between China and Vietnam.
Wow.
That was such an exhilarating experience. It was so much work in so little time. I think we collected data for about 4 or 5 months, and then it took us 4 or 5 years to get from that to the final publication.
Oh my
But a
Lord.
really, really overall positive experience. Lots of fun stories.
Serious perseverance too. But so, I mean, since you spent more than a decade in China, but pick any part you want to talk about. What
Mhm.
surprised you most about the people and daily life there? Because a lot of people learn about US from watching movies, a lot of
Mhm.
foreigners, right? So they expect certain culture because they've seen so many American movies. We don't see a lot of Chinese movies. So
Mhm.
what surprised you when you got there?
I think what I hadn't been expecting was the degree of differences that we would find within China. Um, so to try and draw an analogy that I think a lot of Americans would be able to find meaning in. Imagine the cultural diversity that exists within Europe. That level of cultural diversity is something like what you can find within China. There's a major ethnic group in all areas of China, and you'll find even some variability within the majority ethnic group. The majority Han ethnic group still has linguistic and cultural variability, but there's a tremendous variety of minority ethnicities, languages, cultures, primarily kind of around the border of China, from the south to the west to the north, and really a lot more cultural variation than I was expecting.
Well,
So
that's super
yeah.
interesting. What about the rural communities are, I mean, granted, from an economist perspective, we start
Mhm.
by looking at per capita income, and
Mhm.
China has really progressed. That's one of the reasons I asked you what time frame, because their wealth has, on a nation level, has increased quite rapidly in the last 20 years. But
Yeah.
from your experience in rural instead of city, what can you tell us about that? And what do you think we would be surprised to know?
So the time period that we were there, so 2005 to we came back to the US permanently in 2017, um, there was still a huge change happening and continuing over that time period. Early on, um, the people that we were interacting with were in these villages, small villages of 100 households down to like 20 households in some of the smallest villages that we were going to. The the best thing that you could do to get ahead in life, if you were born into a village, was to leave the village. And you would go to the East Coast of China, find a job in a factory, work in a factory making whatever the factory made, and then send money back to your family in the village if you wanted to, or just try and make a new life on the East Coast. It's moving in China is not as easy as it is to move in the US because of the administrative systems that they have. There's some hurdles that sort of keep you tied to the village that you were born in. But there are ways around that. But we saw this wealth flow in process. So when we were doing this language documentation project, we were going to villages of 20 to 100 households, and we could find children up to like 14, 15, 16, and we could find older people, 50s and 60s. There were some sort of people in the ages in between, but really it was depleted because
Wow.
if you could go to the East Coast, you would make so much more money.
Yeah.
And the things that I mean, even in the county seat of 60,000 people, we're in a fairly modern looking apartment complex, and people would be grazing their water buffaloes through the common areas. There was a river that ran through town, and that was a great place to go graze your water buffalo in the grass by the river next to the apartment complexes.
To the nice high
So
rise.
is this sort of mix of the old way that people have been doing for generations that's really in transition while people are trying to figure out this, we can make money on the East Coast. What do we do now? So it was a little snapshot in that transition, and I would love to go back and see even how these places that we were, how they've changed in the last 5, 10 years. I'm sure it's been
Yeah.
huge from
I
what it
think
was when we were
that
there.
that trend from our economics point of view, the trend has continued.
Hmm.
And it's just like here, US used to be an agrarian society, 83% of the population was involved in farming, and now it's like 1.5 or something like that.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people predict that's the way of most developing countries. But
Hmm.
like, I know you haven't been there in a while, but given your experience in China, what do you make of the current US-China relationship? How do you think about that? Because, we're in this mode where, you know, let's say external forces slash political forces seem to be like paint who our enemy is, right?
Hmm.
And I just read a story this morning about, the kind of three-legged stool of nuclear power and that China is really coming online. How do you look at it? Because I think is a big difference between the population and the leadership of any country. But how,
Yeah.
as I'd say you're one of the more Chinese experts I know of as actually being living there. So how do you feel about it?
So it was a thought that occurred to us a lot of times in this time period. Those factories on the East Coast where everybody's leaving the farms to go work, they're making the things that end up in Walmart, that end up in Dollar Tree, that end up in the stores, or even sometimes high-end stores in the US. So in that time period, I think the US and China, their relationship was one where they were benefiting from the other in a way that was maybe not equal, but it was still positive,
Symbiotic in a way, right?
symbiotic.
Hmm.
Um, and around 2012, there was kind of a political shift in China. This gradual opening that had been happening since the 1980s changed and began not necessarily closing, but becoming more oriented towards social control. Uh, and the belief, I guess part of that was the belief that China could continue with the economic boom that they'd had while adding back some elements of social control that had existed under Mao in the when it was that kind of China post 49, and maybe even some elements that had persisted during the imperial era prior to that. We can talk about Chinese culture and how it has or has not changed over hundreds of years, but I think the big shift was this political change around 2012. And then it became more about competition than symbiosis than cooperation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think there was a political shift in the US, and these two winds of politics collided in a way that are maybe not helpful for either country, not
Mm.
maximally helpful for either country.
Right. That
But
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, but the people that we met, our neighbors in the provincial capital, were some of the warmest and most welcoming people that we've ever happened to live next to. It's just they are not a direct reflection of the political winds of the country.
Which I
So
think is the true,
yeah.
it's what I've experienced everywhere. And my daughter and I
Mhm.
went on a trip to Pakistan,
Hmm.
4 or 5 years ago. And she was, well, let's say 25 or something like that at the time. And she said it was the safest she's ever felt. And
Hmm.
people freak out when they hear that because what they hear about Pakistan, they're truths that they hear, but it's not indicative of the whole country or the people. And
Hmm.
they're so welcoming and they're so happy to see an American in their village and very excited to like give us thousands of cups of tea. So,
Yeah.
so I think a lot of Flynn scholars know this, but I just think it's important to hear more of the different countries. But okay,
Hmm.
now I know we're going to open up to questions shortly, so I'm going to tilt it back to you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight on that. But so you ended up coming back. You have
Hmm.
kids, and having kids in America was a lure.
Hmm.
Tell us about how you shifted from working for an NGO, maybe just maybe a one sentence explainer, because not everybody knows what an NGO is
Hmm.
and how it gets involved in that, like to now being a teacher.
Sure. So NGO, a non-government organization, a nonprofit that is kind of engaged in the things that a government would normally do, supporting communities without it being a government. Um, so 2017, our oldest son was about to start high school, and we thought, we've kind of been moving around in China. The educational environment has been hard for our kids. We had two kids. And we thought it will help them get launched well if we can give them some stability in this sort of getting off into college period of time. So we were scheduled to come back to the US for a 1 year rotation anyway. We thought we'll just stay, let him finish high school, get launched into college, and see how things go. Uh, so that was 2017. We came back. 2020, COVID hits, and our son graduates from high school. Our daughter's starting high school. It really doesn't make sense for us to go back to China given the COVID situation. And at the same time, the political situation was getting even harder to be an expatriate, a foreigner in China working with especially minority ethnic communities. The government is ostensibly concerned about, the U.S. trying to overthrow China by fomenting dissent among ethnic minorities. Not at all what we're doing, but we get caught in that sort of situation, and it's just no longer feasible for an American to work in a Chinese ethnic minority to go out and live in one of these villages. So, like, okay, we can't go back to China realistically. Um, my wife actually ended up getting fairly ill with long COVID, and so it looks like she's not able to work. I am now I need to be able to provide for the family, and I'm looking for other options. I had been able to work remotely for our NGO, still doing supporting work in China while based in Tucson all this time, but on one income that doesn't seem as easy anymore. So I start reconnecting with people at the University of Arizona, especially in the Department of Linguistics, because that's where I had spent a number of years. And one of the faculty members who was my instructor at the time is still in the program, and he says, "Hey, we're looking to hire someone to teach in this human language technology program. You should apply. I think you'd be a really good candidate." Uh, I had a background in linguistics, but because I also had an undergraduate degree in physics, part of what I had been doing for that involved computational modeling. My last space grant internship, the one at U of A, I was doing computational modeling for astrophysical applications. My physics honors thesis, I was working with geophysics, doing finite element modeling of stress. Okay, I can bring this computational stuff to apply to language as well. And I've just it initially they hired me to teach one class and then said, "Okay, we think you're doing great. We want to hire you to teach even more." And I've just really enjoyed it. The things that I enjoy about being a linguist, coming alongside a community, helping the community gain the skills that they need to do what they want with their language. It's exactly the same thing that now I'm doing with students. I have students who have strong background in languages or linguistics, not a lot in computer science, and I am helping them gain those skills to be able to go on and then do useful things in kind of NLP or AI, whatever applications they want to make. So it really feels like if I'm not able to continue contributing the way I was in China, I'm still able to continue contributing with these skills, with the experience I have, just in a slightly different way, now at U of A.
I literally cannot imagine that many people on Earth have the mathematical and engineering programming background who also are passionate about the linguistic side. I mean, I'm just like blown away.
There's a lot of them at U of A now. There's a working group, the Advancing Indigenous Language Technology Working Group. So it's people with linguistics background, but also computational and the mathematical part, working with language communities now in the US, not in China, to try and help them get these tools working for their languages or whatever they would like to do. We use ChatGPT for English, and it's really, really impressive, but it's something that most people aren't aware of is how poorly it works once you leave a set of maybe the top 20, 30 languages in the world. Outside of that, the performance really drops. So
And
what can we do for those communities?
that makes
7,000
sense.
languages in the world. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Which, I guess I'm sure this is something you guys think about is that, I mean, a lot of human development speed in terms of like gaining wealth in society and stuff is really ability to communicate and use the tools that are the top-notch leading edge tools. And
Mhm.
we just take, we meaning I'm just like, speaking for myself, Western
English speakers.
American English speakers just,
Yeah.
take for granted that, you know, it's all made for us. It's
Mm.
just so interesting. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions.
Thank you to both of you for this lovely back and forth. I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences, Eric. I was really intrigued about, I'm when reading kind of your alum profile, the time they spent in China. I started studying Mandarin like last year, and over the summer I was in Taiwan to the CLS program doing intensive study. And so I'm curious about how the transition for you was like from studying Mandarin in Taiwan and then going to live in a rural part of China and like kind of the differences you've noticed in the language between those two regions, but also like how you adjusted. Because like for me in Taiwan, what was really difficult was
Mhm.
like locals in Taipei would just speak really fast or they'd like shorten certain words. It was really different than the kind of Mandarin that I learned in ASU. And so I'm curious about how you
Mhm.
navigated that and like tips you have for language learning.
Ah, great question. Well, I guess we kind of had it easy because we did a year in Taiwan, and then I had all of my graduate school time to sort of begin thinking about, okay, what would it take now to go to the mainland? So we knew that there are going to be lexical differences, different vocabulary that's used in Taiwan versus the mainland. Uh, on the mainland, in Mandarin as it's spoken on the mainland, there is still variation. So we also sort of expected that the Mandarin we encountered was not going to be the same as the Mandarin that we had been interacting with in Taiwan. And so it was really nice to have kind of 2 years of just we're there, we're getting accustomed to the Mandarin as it's spoken there, the way that life is done there. The In the provincial capital where we were learning Mandarin, there is a significant presence of Cantonese. So that particular Mandarin is heavily influenced by Cantonese, among other varieties. Cantonese is not an issue in Taiwan, right? It's going to be Taiwanese or number of other varieties of Chinese that are influencing Mandarin there. So I guess to the extent that you can kind of preview what you're going to expect in the place that you're going that's different from what you were used to in Taiwan, that will help you. And again, having kind of an environment where you can learn slowly and it's okay to not get it right the first time, having forgiving neighbors, that will also help. I think we might have been lucky in that uh, when when we were in that city and spoke anything in Mandarin, because of the way we looked, there was not an expectation that we should speak Mandarin. The very fact that we could say "ni hao" was an immediate, "Oh my goodness, your Chinese is so wonderful." So that expectation, I think, benefited us. Um, I'm trying to think. There was an instance where my wife, who is Caucasian, was with a friend of hers who is an American-born Chinese. My wife's Chinese is better than this other person's Chinese. And when they would go out shopping or go to a restaurant or a coffee shop, the interactions that they would have with local people would be very different. I mean, humorous. We laugh at them now, but the expectation would be that, oh, this other person should speak Chinese but doesn't, and this person who shouldn't speak Chinese does, and it can be a negative social stereotype for some people and positive for others. And we were fortunate enough to benefit from the positive, um, that it was miraculous. We could speak Chinese. Uh, but I'm trying to think of, other things to apply. We just got lucky in going to an area where they spoke slowly to us. That helped.
Eric, is there a recent breakthrough in linguistics that you find exciting?
So, yeah, not necessarily in linguistics. I think this in computational linguistics and natural language processing, what we've seen in the last 3 years is really surprising. So 2022, I think, is when uh, models of Chat GPT really began to have what I would call reliable or consistent uh, grammatical performance. We could transformer models that are the foundation of things like ChatGPT were around since 2017, but when applied to language modeling, it really didn't get good, I think, until 2022. And we've seen that as high school students and college students have begun using tools like ChatGPT to help with their learning or to do their homework for them. I think one can be positive, one can be maybe detrimental to their skills and their learning, but the fact that it can be done is, I think, a really amazing thing. And I'm very interested in the impact of LLMs on higher education and on learning, as well as this fact that they're representing knowledge that until that point had really only been uh, mastered by humans. Prior to that time, artificial grammars, even statistical language models didn't do as well as humans did. So what's happening there, really interesting. But it takes 4 orders of magnitude more language data to do it. So also, what is going on and why are we seeing these differences? That's, yeah,
And
amazing things for linguists.
where is it going to go? I mean,
And where
that's
is it going to go?
yeah, I mean, the things that it might unlock that we haven't even r remotely thought of. I think it's super exciting.
Mhm.
Michelle's got a good question. I'm really interested in your answer. Are you forbidden to work with Chinese colleagues now, as NASA scientists are forbidden?
Mhm. I don't think I am forbidden, but there are definitely some pitfalls that I now have to be careful of. So when I first started at U of A, they had also just opened up a number of partner campuses, satellite campuses, micro campuses. I forget the terminology that they use, in a number of places in China. And some of the programs they had there, one of them included data science, and there was a class that they were going to be teaching in statistical NLP. That's a class that I teach here. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to teach statistical NLP for one of these Chinese micro campuses? And we've now, just within the last few months, the university has closed all of these Chinese micro campuses.
Mm.
Um, we've gotten emails directing us to avoid connections with a particular set of Chinese universities. So not Chinese linguists as a whole, but a particular set of universities that we can't work with because of their connection to the
The government.
military in China.
Mm.
So yeah, unfortunately, there are those sorts of limitations. I wish that and I think the people that I know, the linguists who I have connections with, so far it's safe to connect with them, but we'll see how
Such a,
things go.
yeah, it's such a bummer. I mean, generally speaking, I like if we could have open communications, but I understand that there's a military issue, blah, blah, blah. Um,
I'm an academic. I'm all for intellectual freedom and sharing of information, but yeah.
Okay, Anne has this question, and I love this. I'm obsessed. So I'm doing all this neuroscience research right now, and so I'm gonna catch you in the next few weeks. I'm gonna send you some stuff.
Okay.
But Anne's got a question. What's a word in another language that you think should exist in English? Because to me, I've learned so many funky words, like in German or Japanese, which I would not be able to tell you what they are right now, but they mean such very
Mhm.
specific things that we don't have a word for in English. Do you have any favorites?
So there are words. So the four of us in my, immediate family, we all speak Chinese. And there are words where we will prefer to use the Chinese term instead of an English term. The first one that comes to mind is 麻烦, which is a Chinese word that means something like hassle, effort, complexity, but not pleasant complexity. It's 麻烦. So it has been a very useful word for us, at least within our family, because we choose.
Okay, you sounded really legit when you said that. I had a Chinese friend who is, yeah, I won't even pretend it, but she was trying to say like seven intonations of ma in like seven different ways, and they meant seven different things.
Hmm.
And no matter how many times she said it to me, I thought I was saying the same thing back, and it was a no-go. I'm curious what you think. I know we have to wrap up soon, but just humor me with one question.
Hmm.
Um, I know that, humans are born with very similar anatomical, like you said, the mechanics, the physical parts.
Hmm.
And yet where we grow up and the tones and sounds that we hear really create the basis for what we are able to do and
Hmm.
when we speak ourselves. I mean, to me, Chinese is out there in terms of different to English in sounds and intonations. Do you feel that anyone has the ability to, with enough time and effort, even if they're older, not just pick up on a language, but pick up on those like actual physical uses of
Like
sound that they
getting the
aren't?
pronunciation really close
Mm-hmm,
or native level.
mm-hmm,
I would like to think it's possible. I mean, as a linguist, that's something that I try to do. In this dialect survey that we were doing, I was having to listen to words that people were saying and then pronounce them back until they were happy that my pronunciation accurately reflected theirs. So I think it's possible, but it's hard. It takes effort. Maybe some people have more uh, aptitude for this than others. But part of it is also just developing the muscles the
mm-hmm,
right way. So people who use clicks, languages that involve clicks as a consonant,
mm-hmm,
I think you have to develop those muscles in your mouth to be able to get enough suction to produce that same level of noise
mm-hmm.
that a native speaker would be able to produce because they've been doing it for their speaking life. I cannot produce clicks in the way that some people can, but just
You
because
tried?
my muscles have not been developed for those clicks. I can isolated clicks, but I can't do it in the middle of a kosa word in as loud as a native speaker could.
So our final question is, for anyone who's thinking about, learning more in linguistics or going into a career, whether it's educational or afterwards, looking ahead, especially since you're involved a lot with AI, like what advice would you give them? It could be general, it could be specific, just, from what you see in terms of the career paths available for this field, what would you tell us?
I think something that gets overlooked, um, at least within computer science departments, maybe sort of school of information um, departments, when someone starts to analyze language, there's a tendency to think, oh, I speak language, I know language, I now know the computer programming part, I can do this without really thinking or investing time in that part of it. I speak the language. But it does take some time and some effort, I think, to understand language as a kind of data. And
Mhm.
so I would say don't underestimate how important that aspect of learning about language and how it functions and how in some cases English can leave out the arguments of a verb, but not in other cases. What is the systematic generalization there? Don't just rush in and say, oh, I can write a program, we can drop arguments in English, it's fine.
Hmm.
So really understanding the data that you're going to be working with is going to be foundational before you start trying to do something useful based on that data. So don't, if your background is in a foreign language, in Italian, in Spanish or French, that can be an important foundation for moving on to work in AI for Italian or Spanish or French. We can add the
Gotcha.
computer science later.
That's so cool. Super interesting. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time.
Well,
And
this was
like I said,
fun. Thank you
I'm
again for the invitation.